I set up a hidden camera to check on my ailing father and realized my wife was deliberately sabotaging his medication to speed up his inheritance. My name is Adam, and for the last year, my life has been defined by the slow, painful decline of my father, Richard. Dad had suffered a massive stroke that left him largely incapacitated, requiring round-the-clock care. He was unable to speak clearly, communicate complex needs, or manage his own elaborate medication schedule. It was a tragedy that consumed our family, forcing my wife, Chloe, and me to make the impossible decision to move him into our home. Chloe, bless her soul, was the one who insisted on taking over his primary care. "We're a team, Adam," she'd told me with unwavering determination. "I won't let your father die in a sterile nursing home. I'll take care of him myself." Chloe was meticulous in her duties. She managed the feeding tube, oversaw the physical therapy, and rigorously managed his complex medication regimen, a precise schedule of blood pressure stabilizers, anticoagulants, and pain medication, all dispensed at specific times. I relied entirely on her competence, praising her publicly and privately as a saint, a devoted daughter-in-law who sacrificed her own time and energy for my family's well-being. This absolute trust was the most devastating mistake I ever made. The initial doubts were microscopic, easily dismissed as anxiety. I noticed Dad's condition wasn't just declining, it seemed to be spiraling faster than his doctors predicted. His blood pressure readings, which Chloe took daily, were dangerously erratic. His agitation was worsening, often peaking inexplicably an hour after he was supposed to receive his evening sedative. When I questioned Chloe, she would dismiss my concerns with medical jargon, citing his underlying systemic instability or the natural progression of the stroke damage. She was the expert, and I was the grateful, anxious son. The true moment of suspicion came last month. I came home early and found Chloe rushing out of Dad's room, her face pale and strained. She immediately launched into a frantic explanation, claiming Dad had been violently agitated and had nearly pulled out his feeding tube. She said she had just managed to calm him down. But as I walked into the room, I noticed something small and jarring. The weekly pill box, which should have been locked in the medical cabinet, was sitting on Dad's bedside table, slightly ajar. Next to it, there was a single, small glass of water. And most unsettlingly, there was a tiny, faint blue stain on the clean white sheet near where the pill box lay. One of Dad's critical anticoagulants was a bright blue pill. The explanation Chloe offered, that she had forgotten to put the pillbox away, didn't match the tremor in her hands. The blue stain, the erratic blood pressure, the sudden sharp spikes in his agitation, it all clicked into a terrifying singular possibility. She was deliberately altering his medication. I couldn't confront her without proof. The shame of even suspecting my wife, the woman I called a saint, of such an unspeakable crime was paralyzing. But the fear for my father's safety was greater than the fear of shattering my marriage. I am a software engineer. I found a way to act silently. I ordered a professional-grade, miniature surveillance camera, small enough to be hidden inside the plastic shell of Dad's unused digital clock radio. I installed it the next afternoon while Chloe was out, ensuring it captured a clear view of the bedside table, the medicine cup, and the water glass. That night, I watched the live feed from my home office. I expected to find negligence, maybe forgetfulness. What I witnessed was cold, calculated malice. At precisely 7 p.m., Chloe entered the room with the measured, practiced efficiency of a caregiver. She prepared the water and the small cup of crushed medication Dad needed for his feeding tube. She spoke softly to him, performing her role beautifully. Then she paused. With a quick, furtive glance at the door, she isolated 2 pills from the cup, one of the blue anticoagulants and one of the essential blood pressure stabilizers. She did not crush them.
Instead, she placed them on a tissue, tucked them into her apron pocket, crushed the remaining pills, and administered the partial dosage to my father's feeding tube. Then she walked to the bathroom, flushed the missing pills, and returned, resuming her gentle, soothing voice as if nothing happened. I watched the same horrifying ritual play out over the next 3 evenings. She wasn't forgetting the medication, she was deliberately withholding the drugs vital for keeping him stable. She was giving him just enough to maintain the illusion of care, while gradually, methodically pushing him toward a lethal health crisis. The erratic blood pressure, the agitation, the decline, it wasn't the stroke's progression, it was homicide by subtraction. The chilling question remained, why? Why would my compassionate, devoted wife deliberately murder the father who was no threat to her? The answer lay in the financial structure of the Miller family. My father's will, which I had helped draft years ago, was simple. Everything was divided equally between me and my sister Emily. But Dad had recently sold a large piece of commercial property, the reason for the unexpected wealth that Mark had tried to manage in the last story, and the proceeds were held in a specialized annuity. The key clause of the annuity stipulated that the funds could only be released upon the death of the primary beneficiary, Dad. The total sum was enormous, enough to pay off our mortgage, clear our debts, and secure our lives forever. Chloe knew this. She had insisted on moving Dad in, not out of love, but out of financial motivation. She saw his inevitable death not as a tragedy, but a massive, life-altering payday, and she was doing everything in her power to advance the timeline. The saintly caregiver was an angel of death. I stopped watching the feed after the 4th day. I had all the evidence I needed. Hours of video footage showing my wife deliberately sabotaging my father's life-saving medication. The cold, overwhelming weight of the betrayal, the medical fraud, the abuse of trust, the ultimate familial crime forced me to confront the unthinkable reality my wife was trying to kill my father for his money.
She stared at me, her initial panic melting into a desperate, furious self-pity. She launched into a frantic defense, not of innocence, but of justification. "It was his time, Adam. The doctors said he wouldn't recover. He was suffering. You and Emily were too weak to let him go. I was being merciful, and that money would have saved our lives. We are drowning in debt, and he was just waiting to die." Her confession was the final, sickening confirmation. It wasn't mercy, it was avarice masked as compassion. She saw my father not as a man, but as a financial hurdle. Just as her voice peaked in a hysterical sob, the doorbell rang, hard, official, and demanding. The police had arrived. The arrest was quick, brutal, and public. I watched from the living room window as the officers read her Miranda rights, snapping the handcuffs onto the wrists that had so carefully administered poison. The neighbors, accustomed to seeing Chloe as the angelic caregiver, watched in stunned silence. The image of the devoted wife was shattered forever, replaced by the reality of the cold-blooded criminal. The subsequent legal chaos was overwhelming. Chloe was formally charged with attempted murder and elder abuse. The police investigation unearthed further evidence of her meticulously planned crime. Search history on her laptop detailing lethal drug interactions and the specific financial structure of my father's annuity. The immediate relief of Dad's safety was mixed with the profound, paralyzing guilt of my own negligence. I had entrusted my father's life to a woman I loved, only to discover her ambition was murderous. I was forced to testify against my wife, detailing my slow, agonizing suspicion and the horrifying proof recorded on the hidden camera. My sister Emily was a rock of cold fury, serving as the voice of justice for our incapacitated father. Meanwhile, the stress of the event had a massive, destabilizing effect on my father's health. Though physically safe in the hospital, his mental state deteriorated further. He would often ask for Chloe, confused by her sudden absence, forcing me to tell the painful, simplified lie that she had moved far away. The emotional scarring on my father was permanent. The ensuing civil lawsuit against Chloe was complex.
My lawyer sought not just divorce, but full restitution for the medical costs incurred during her fraudulent care and damages for emotional distress and elder abuse. The goal was to ensure she walked away with nothing, not a dime of the inheritance she risked a man's life for. I wanted every cent of her future earnings to be tied up in paying for the emotional and financial damage she inflicted upon my family. The criminal trial that followed was a public spectacle. The local papers seizing on the story of the angelic caregiver revealed as a predator. I sat through weeks of testimony, forced to relive the betrayal through the sterile lens of the courtroom, while the prosecution presented the video evidence of Chloe methodically removing my father's life-saving medication. The defense tried to argue temporary insanity and misguided euthanasia, but the detailed financial motive, the specific structure of the annuity, and the cold, calculated nature of the sabotage were undeniable. The jury returned a swift verdict, guilty on all counts of elder abuse and attempted murder. The judge delivered a harsh sentence, ensuring Chloe would spend a significant portion of her life behind bars, paying the cost for her avarice. Her collapse in the courtroom was not of remorse, but of disbelief that her perfect plan had failed so spectacularly. With the criminal case closed, the civil suit moved quickly. I sought not only divorce but also the total financial ruin of Chloe, ensuring she would never benefit from the tragedy she created. The final settlement awarded me full compensation for the medical costs incurred during her fraudulent care, and she forfeited all claims to the marital assets and, crucially, to the inheritance. The judge's ruling made it explicit. The inheritance, the annuity, remained intact for my father, and on his eventual death, it would pass legally to my sister and me. Chloe would receive nothing. The money that motivated her crime was the very thing she was definitively barred from ever touching. The hardest part, however, was accepting the new reality of my father. The stroke had left him vulnerable, but Chloe's calculated abuse had inflicted a profound psychological and medical trauma that accelerated his decline. He was physically stable, but his mind never fully recovered from the chemical chaos she forced upon him. He spent his final months in a specialized care facility, quiet and mostly unresponsive, never knowing the full horror of the crime committed in his name. His death, a year after the trial, was peaceful, but it was overshadowed by the painful knowledge that his life had been systematically shortened by the greed of a family member. My sister and Emily inherited the annuity as planned. We used the funds responsibly, securing our own financial stability and establishing a significant trust in my father's name for elder abuse awareness. The money is a constant, heavy reminder of the price of the life he lived and the life Chloe tried to steal. The years of recovery were defined by the rebuilding of trust, not in others, but in myself. I have to forgive myself for my blind negligence, for calling a predator a saint, and for letting my gratitude overshadow my paternal duty. I slowly learned to trust my instincts again, relying only on the transparent, verified facts of life. I'm a single man now, raising my own children with a fierce, protective vigilance. Chloe's name is never spoken in our home. I may have lost my wife and the innocence of my trust, but I gained something infinitely more valuable: the knowledge that I fought for my father's dignity and won. I carry the scars of the betrayal, but I also carry the deep, enduring peace of knowing that I exposed the lethal caregiver and secured justice for the man who loved me enough to let me marry his murderer. The video footage is gone, destroyed, but the terrifying truth it contained is the foundation of my honest, fragile, and utterly secure future.